Good morning, friends. Welcome. It's a very great pleasure to welcome you to HCS Alumni Day. It's a very great pleasure to welcome you to Alumni Day, even though it's a little wet. We are so glad that you all have come out, most especially for this important conversation with Gloria White-Hammond and Melinda Weeks. Our theme today is Beyond Borders, Inspiration, Courage, and Progress. And we're beginning with two of our illustrious alums on a question of courage: who will be my sister's keeper? My Sister's Keeper is a nonprofit organization co-founded by Gloria White-Hammond and Liz Walker, another of our alums, in 2002, that's focused on assisting, protecting, and advocating for the women of southern Sudan who live in Gogrial County. Aimed at creating toward greater stability in Sudan, they seek to catalyze other women across the globe to gather in sisterhood and harness human, financial, and information resources to the women and communities they choose to serve. Currently, My Sister's Keeper is focusing on supporting the development of a girls' school in the village of Akan. The Reverend Gloria White-Hammond is well known probably to all of you. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in biology from Boston University, a Doctor of Medicine from Tufts Medical School, and a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. She is the co-pastor of Bethel AME Church in Boston since 1997, and she has long been a pediatrician at the South End Community Health Center. Her long involvement in community service, both in our communities close at hand and communities far off, is quite remarkable. She's the founder of the church-based creative writing and mentoring ministry called Do the Right Thing for high-risk African-American adolescent young women. This project now serves over 550 young women through small groups in 2 Boston public schools, 2 juvenile detention centers in Boston, and on-site at Bethel AME Church. In 2002, she co-founded My Sister's Keeper, as I said, a humanitarian women's group that partners with women of Sudan in their efforts toward reconciliation and reconstruction of their communities. This work has kept Gloria on the road quite a bit. She has traveled to Sudan 7 times, most recently into Darfur. She is the founding co-chair of the Massachusetts Coalition to Save Darfur and chairwoman of the Save Darfur Coalition's A Million Voices for Darfur campaign. You might have seen Gloria's letter to the editor of the New York Times a few days ago in response to an editorial blaming Darfur activists for romanticizing the rebels and somehow interfering in negative ways in the peace process. Gloria's response was pointed and clear, and it is on the New York Times website, and I recommend it to you. We're also delighted to have with us today Melinda Weeks, a very recent graduate of Harvard Divinity School. She graduated last year with her Master of Divinity degree. She also has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Wesleyan University and earned her JD from New York University School of Law. As a member of the New York and New Jersey bars, Melinda operated a transactional law practice before moving to Boston to attend HDS, where she graduated last year when the sun was shining. As a social enterprise consultant, Melinda has completed projects with numerous Boston-based agencies, including the United Way of Massachusetts Bay and the Black Ministerial Alliance of Greater Boston. In addition, she is a gospel music theorist and has recently been retained to write the biographies of 2 gospel music icons, Edwin Hawkins and Tremaine Hawkins, for the African American National Biography. Earlier this year, Melinda accepted the position of Director of Program Development for the Roxbury Tenants of Harvard Association, Incorporated. In this post, she directs and develops programs for a community of over 2,000 residents in the heart of Boston's Mission Hill neighborhood. She began working with My Sister's Keeper while still a student at HDS. and is a testimony, I think, to the ways in which many of our alums, remain important influences for our current students. Gloria and Liz Walker this year have been important mentors, especially for our first-year MDivs and for women in ministry, and this just continues gathering up students as it goes. So we're delighted to have you both with us. I don't want to take any more time. We'll have about 45 minutes for a presentation from Gloria and Melinda, and then we'll stop and have some conversation with the whole group. So please be thinking of your questions, and we look forward to that conversation. Gloria and Melinda.
Thank you so much. It is indeed a privilege to be back again. Spent some great time here, 3 frenetic years as a student here working on my MDiv, and am forever grateful to the Divinity School for the, not only for the academic training, but for the spirit of the place and the contribution that you have made into my life. And I'm going to ask it, let's see, who's our slide person? Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Eleanor Roosevelt, who is someone who many of us have looked up to, made this statement: women, whether subtly or vociferously, have always been a tremendous power in the destiny of the world. And we think that that is aptly demonstrated in our group, My Sister's Keeper. It is a humanitarian action initiative of our congregation, which is Bethel AME Church in Boston, Massachusetts. The vision for My Sister's Keeper is a world where women all across the globe have permission, take permission, seize the power to imagine, create, and sustain vibrant and joyous communities. Our mission: to assist, protect, and advocate for women of southern Sudan who live in Gogrial County, and we'll have an opportunity to see where that is on the map.
And we exist to be a friend to these women. We listen to their stories. We learn about their needs, and we support their aspirations for economic, educational, and physical vitality.
We are a catalyst for change. We harness and provide human, financial, and knowledge resources to the women and communities in which we serve.
The country of Sudan is the largest country on the continent of Africa. It is directly south of Egypt. And people have lived there for thousands of years by the Nile, in particular, farming and herding there.
This is going to be interesting, because we've to try to do both of these. Go ahead now, Melinda. I'm sorry.
So focusing on, for Sudan, just to give you an idea of this country that we're so focused on, has a population of about 35 million. It is 1/4 the size of the U.S. or the equivalent of Western Europe. In 1956, it got its independence from the British, who in the 1800s took over the country as a colony along with help from Egypt. In 1983, Islamic law was instituted after the country had gotten back its independence, and the government began to enforce a very strict version of Islamic law called Sharia law and impose it on all of the country, which is a very diverse ethnically tribes. There's in the north is mainly many of the Arabs of the country. In the south and other parts of the country, you have the black Africans. In the south, you also have Christianity that persisted over centuries, as well as traditional religions. So with this imposition of Sharia law, it became very even more complicated, and rebels in the south began to resist that. And in 1984, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army was formed to push back on the government of Sudan and this strict version of Islamic law.
You can see there, with the onset of that North-South Civil War, 2 million people were killed, 4 million people displaced. including some of the young men that we refer to as the Lost Boys of Sudan. And can you hear me? Is this okay? And then untold numbers of people were enslaved. I'm sure that many of you followed Darfur, have heard of that whole scenario of the government of Sudan with the Arab militia into the villages, killing the men, raping the women, and maiming the children. That strategy was developed, refined to an art in South Sudan. So there is the genocide in Darfur, and there's also the genocide in South Sudan. And again, in addition to all of the killing, significant numbers of women and children are also taken into northern Sudan, where they are sold into slavery.
So the particular conflict in Darfur began basically in 2003 and is continuing to this day. However, in 2005, a comprehensive peace agreement was signed between the northern government and the south, bringing peace between those two areas, but yet the genocide and the war, as it were, continues to rage just in the western part of the country.
I made my first trip into South Sudan in July 2001, and here is a picture of one of the women who's included in my Sister's Keeper, Pat Brandis. The scenario in terms of South Sudan is when the villages are raided, people are taken to the north where they're sold into slavery. For the most part, these slaves are domestic workers, and their experiences very much mirror the experiences of my ancestors here in America. They live outside among the cattle and the goat. Women serve as concubines for the masters. Young girls are sometimes forced to undergo female circumcision, a practice which is common in the north but not so common in the south. And it's not only about having to serve as slaves, but there's also the challenges in terms of the physical abuse. I'm going to cue you for the next slide before, well, anyway, you're going to see this slide. This is, when I was looking out over a crowd of several hundred of these slaves, who I observed this young man's face, who was so grotesque that I assumed it was a congenital deformity. It turned out that, in fact, that was not the case. He, as many young boys, was charged with the responsibility of keeping the cattle. He lost a cow. His master was so angry with him that he took an axe and literally chopped the boy's nose off. And so that was the deformity that we are seeing there. I'm going to ask you to slip to the next slide. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about the slave redemption process. There's a group that's based in Zurich called Christian Solidarity International. We initially made our trips into South Sudan under their auspices. They have partnered with villages in the south to develop a fairly elaborate underground railroad in which the villagers identify sympathetic Arabs who will go into the north, identify loved ones from their particular village. They will either abduct them from their slave owners or they will buy them from their slave owners. And then they collect them in tens, hundreds, and eventually, even into the thousands, bring them back to their particular neighborhood where their freedom is purchased. The Christian Solidarity International and the locals, as well as the Arab retrievers, have worked out a price of $33 per person. A cow, on the other hand, will cost you $100. So this was, again, a very elaborate scheme, which now, in the wake of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in the South, is no longer in effect. When I made that trip and began to hear the stories from these mostly women and children of their enslavement, one of my requests was to have a female who could translate for me, because the kinds of stories that women were telling were rather sensitive, and I felt as though it would just make a difference if I had a female to translate. My host from CSI, Christian Solidarity International, said he'd never met a woman who could speak both Dinka and English. Obviously, such a woman would be well educated and would lead in the midst of the war. And I just said, God, I have a sense that there's just, you can help me with this. And in the next slave redemption, in fact, I met this woman, Achol, who was the director of social welfare for Gogrial County. She spoke Dinka and English, and just to show you how good God is at confirming things, her Dinka name is Achol, and her Christian name is Gloria. That's right. So we have partnered with Achol, and again, when we met her, she was the director of social welfare. Eventually, became the president, so to speak, of women's associations in Gogrial County. And just this past year, with the peace agreement and a new government of South Sudan, she's been appointed the commissioner of West Gogrial County. So there she is in her ceremonial dress. And again, she's been a tremendous partner over these years.
One of the things that blew my mind when I first joined my Sisters Keeper, but I really didn't realize it until my first visit to Sudan in the summer of 2004, was how the bedrock of this organization and this work across the continents was really formed on relationship, and the relationship of principally two women, Gloria and Achol, and then as she brought in more of us, and Achol leads women, and now she governs a whole county, the formation of that is embedded in relationship. And much of our approach is very much to listen and to be in relationship with these women and to hear what they need and to see to what extent we might assist them in their own initiatives. So out of that became several of our projects. From listening to their stories, one of the things that was central to them when Gloria and Liz engaged groups of women and went from village to village to listen to them, they said that two things were important. One is that they wanted to be relieved from doing this, which is pounding sorghum, which is their staple food, which can take up to 8 hours just to get one meal. So women and little girls spend much of their time doing this just to feed their families. And what they wanted to do was to be relieved of this through the purchase, if we could help them with grinding mills. So that was one of our first initiatives, was to aid them in the purchase and the transport of grinding mills, which cut down their work from 8 hours for one meal to being able to do that in just a couple of hours, and then it actually feeds over 200 families in a village. So just a little bit, these grinding mills cost maybe about a couple $1,000s.
Right, and by the time you do all of the installation, et cetera, for the two grinding mills, it ended up being about $20,000, the transport, et cetera. My favorite story with the grinding mill is we had the villagers came as we dedicated, and they thanked us, gave us a goat, et cetera. But the women talked about how it freed them up to do other entrepreneurial projects, and girls talked about how it freed them up to go to school. But the most wonderful story was a gentleman who stood up and said he especially wanted to express his appreciation. He said before the grinding mill that his wife was always cross, and their marriage was very bad. But ever since they had the grinding mill, she was much more pleasant, and his marriage was much improved. So we are also in the married couples ministry there.
And of course, part of what this does is to free up the little girls in particular from having to work all day and night through this very arduous labor, physical labor, and would enable them to be able to attend school, which was the second thing that was most important to these women, was to be able to educate their girls. And that right now has become the forefront task of my Sisters Keeper in terms of assisting the women. In about 2004, April 2004, we found out through the miles that they had already begun to start a school for girls in their village. The Women's Center had pulled their resources and began to educate their girls. And so this is a picture of the girls and their wonderful uniforms and things that we were able to say, okay, this is what you're going to do. We're going to come right behind you and see how we can be supportive of that. More pictures of the girls.
Most people agree that in developing countries that the fastest shortcut to developing an entire community is to educate girls. So this is very important. These are the Millennium Development Goals. You're probably aware of these 8 goals that were developed by way of the United Nations. And one of the goals is to ensure that all boys and girls complete a full course of primary schooling. That target date is 2015. Sudan is one of the 25 countries that is, people indicate that they are not likely to achieve this goal by 2015. If you could just go back, Melinda. on the other hand, we could go forward. Just to give you some sense of what's happening in Goguryeo County, this is from a report last year. 16% of primary school-age population in Goguryeo County is enrolled in primary school. So you can see that we are a long way toward before we can ensure that all boys and girls complete a full course of primary schooling. And in the next slide, the other goal is to eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education at all levels. Again, we're talking about Goguryeo County. Of all of the children who are in school, only 18% of them are girls. Less than 3% of teachers are female, and this is very significant because one of the challenges, of course, is girls can sometimes start school, but for a variety of reasons, they are then pulled out of school and not so likely to graduate. And part of what we found was they have no role models. And so they've never seen a woman in a position of authority or teaching them in school. So this is a tremendous problem. South Sudan has a lower percentage of girls attending school than any other country in the world. And that explains why 90% of Southern Sudanese women are illiterate.
So with the school already started by the women, and then also it happened after that for me in terms of becoming aware of the Millennium Development Goals, and that's when they were pushing the education of girls in particular as being key to helping development in developing countries. We were also very much clear by the women that their desire was to help them build a physical school. The school that you saw that already had started was taking place primarily under a tree and under trees as classrooms in southern Sudan. So just this past December, my Sister's Keeper, went back to Sudan to conduct a community assessment. And these are 6 of the 7 women that comprise My Sister's Keeper. The 7th is Liz Walker, who you also know, Ashley Lanford, myself, Cynthia Bell, who also will be starting at the Divinity School this coming fall. So again, the line and the tradition and the synergies with HGS continue. Pat Brandis. And we have Sarah Rial, who is a Southern Sudanese woman who recently we have the privilege of hiring as our program director, and Gloria, who you know. When we arrived in Sudan this past December, and every time we arrive, it's a big greeting and much singing and much celebration. Over much time, it's communicated that we're coming and people are ready. If you could, I'll just try to read what's on that flyer, on that poster. To the Honorable Commissioner Achol, who's Achol, who Gloria met years ago and now is the commissioner of this whole region. We schoolgirls, there is a happy day for us because we are going to receive our support, who is Mrs. Achol and other sisters, that would be us, plus the Ministry of the New Sudan, which Achol presides over. We wish you all to think of the schoolgirls whenever you want to do something in your office. Because schoolgirls is not enough in New Sudan. We really are begging to encourage schoolgirls, as many as Achol will open the school. So it's welcoming. It's clear of this whole idea of school being huge in terms of this community, and very much under the leadership of this female commissioner, Achol, who's kind of over the years built this relationship with us, and we've built it with her to see this happening in her community. So our community assessment comprised of very much trying to meet with all of the stakeholders in the community, from the fathers of girls who were already in school, to elders, those who keep the traditions and the wisdom of the community, to parents who would like to send their children to school, and lots of kind of group community meetings. This is a snapshot of one of those village meetings where Achol in the green was presiding and another commissioner next to her, and Gloria. And again, much of this is conversation, building up and affirming the trust in what we say that we want to do and assisting them, but also very much listening to what their vision is for school. This is a snapshot of the school and of a classroom, as it were, under a tree. Oh, who knows?
I'm sure it's hundreds of years.
Yeah, baobab tree.
It's amazing. amazing.
There's Liz Walker in the background, actually. Oh, that's not Liz. That's Gloria. That's you. That's you. Who knows?
This is the headmaster of the school, and again, you've heard these numbers, how few women there are in teaching in school. And even with this gentleman has never finished high school, so it's not as though he's well educated, he's just better educated than the girls and pretty much anyone else in the village. This is, we came in December, it was during their final exams, and this is one of the questions for the final exam. It says, say true or false, and this is the question. Sexual practices result into the following. 1, the girl becomes unconscious. Well, maybe. 2, she loses most of her friends. Okay. So that's this. So you get a sense of, again, these are wonderful efforts to educate. But we've got a lot of work to do, and looking forward to partnering with them in that support. On our way out in December, we visited a girls' school in Rumbek, which is one of the larger cities not so far from Akan. And this young woman is the headmaster. Again, she has finished secondary school, and but there's still tremendous needs. None of the teachers are being paid, and you can well imagine that they're doing this at great sacrifice, but not so sure that they can continue to do this for so long. And again, there's the picture of Sarah, who is our program director, who has not been in South Sudan for over 20 years, and it spends the 20 years just dreaming and hoping and praying that one day she would go back and be able to do the rebuilding. She's educated in Cairo and in northern Sudan and here in the United States. So when we returned in December, the first thing she did was got off the plane and kissed the ground and thanked God for answering her prayers.
One of our main objectives while on the ground in Sudan for this last trip was to, under Achol's leadership and very much under her blessing, to identify those in the community who would be able to give leadership to this project and to serve as a community, a council, a governing council for the school. These are some of the people that were identified over the course of the time there. Very much the people themselves showing the initiative, kind of rearranged some of the players and brought some more women to actually serve on this council. But this is a photo taken after one of our meetings with them. Again, to hear from them, to answer any questions they had, to talk about some of the obstacles we face in terms of government regulations. The Sudan is considered a terrorist nation by our government. The Patriot Act and other constraints limit some of the ways in which we can do business with Sudan. So we were very much interested in trying to articulate some of those barriers, but also to give them any assurances they needed that we were coming to this with integrity, and we would do our best to kind of work together with them. So our advisory council.
And this brother, he was the one who was most intriguing.
The hat.
Yeah,
the brother with the hat.
The hat and the car coat, right? So if we'd stayed a little bit longer, he would have had another wife, because he was loving Melinda.
Well, he looks like brothers I know from 125th Street. And again, this is 100 degrees, right? Yeah. It's 100 degrees, so he has a coat on like this with the hat. I know that guy. Yeah. More pictures of the girls.
The first time we met them, they greeted us with a song that roughly translates, it is now our time to be in charge, it's our turn to rule. So that's real girl power. I'm going to take you now into Darfur, and I traveled to Darfur in February 2005, and again, you have the picture. I'll be my own pointer here.
Can you tell us where that county is on the map?
Yes, I'll be.
Would you like this? How about using this?
Oh my God.
Yeah, wait. Does it work? Here we go.
Oh, great.
You got to keep it pressed down. Keep the red pressed down.
Okay,
Shaking
so
together.
This is Sudan. This area here forms southern Sudan. Gogrial County is about here, okay, and the village of Akan, which is where Salva Kiir is from. And this is all of Darfur, right here. So you can see it's a fairly large area. This is pretty much 100% Muslims. There are about 6 million people in Darfur, and I've heard of less than 25 who would be considered Christians. This is northern Bahr el-Ghazal, and I point this out because most of us have heard about people in Darfur, the refugees who are in Chad, but there are also a fair number who are in northern Bahr el-Ghazal, and so when I make my next trip in, I will go into northern Bahr el-Ghazal because there's so many Darfurian refugees who are getting no humanitarian support. So this is, I went there in February 2005 with again, Liz Walker, who is an alum of this prestigious university. This woman is Susan Romansky, who is field director actually, she is a project developer for Mercy Corps, which is this wonderful humanitarian group based in Portland, Oregon. And whenever there's a catastrophe, it is her job to get there before anybody else to set up for whatever the catastrophe is. So she had just come from setting up in Indonesia for the tsunami relief in February before she joined us in Darfur. This woman, Linda Mason, she and her husband are co-founders of Bright Horizons, which is the worksite-based child development centers, 550 of them in the United States and in London, and then myself. You have heard the scenario. This woman is just one example of women who have been displaced from their villages. And just go ahead to the next slide, Melinda. Went there again with Liz and Linda, especially to represent American women and to let them know that we were aware of their plight and were committed to doing what we could to address them. Mm-hmm. We met with 60 women over the 5 days that we were on the ground. Of the 60 women with whom we met, 24 or 40% of them reported having been raped. I was particularly intrigued with this next slide of, oops. I know we really have. Where would you like to go? Okay, we're going to stay right there. We'll stay right there. This woman, the scarring that you see here is from a woman who had been 2.5 weeks postpartum when her hut was invaded. She saw her husband castrated, his genitals stuffed in his mouth. He was slaughtered. She was then raped by 3 men at knife point. She showed me the scars from her efforts to resist on this, her leg, and then the next slide. The next slide shows the scarring from an attempt to slice off her ear. That's a common injury in Darfur. One of the challenges for women is that they, again, just like the women in South Sudan, they cook every day. Women here cook every day as well, which means that they have to leave their villages to collect firewood. And when they do so, they are at risk and, in fact, have been raped. They even have traveled in larger groups. As we met with the women, they talked about having developed this strategy with maybe 30 of them going out. They thought there was strength in numbers, and in fact, that group was attacked, and those who were not able to escape were raped. Currently, these people in Darfur are being protected to some extent by African Union soldiers. There are 7,000 of them who've come from several countries in Africa, Rwanda supplying the largest number. Unfortunately, while they have done a noble effort, and when we went, people certainly did appreciate their presence, it really has not been enough to stave off the rapes and the killing and the desperations, the desperate stories about which you have heard so much. So one of the challenges for the African Union is quite simply to protect women when they go out to get firewood. One of the strategies that was developed by Mercy Corps was to develop these fuel-efficient stoves. Mm-hmm. So in the previous slide, you saw women actually making those stoves. They bake in the sun, and then they, in the next slide, you'll see them actually using the stove. This does not obviate the need for them to collect firewood, but at least minimizes the amount of time that they have to spend collecting the firewood. One of the highlights for me was the School of Midwifery, which was started the first year of the war by the woman in the flowered hijab. She's delivered thousands of babies in this particular region that we visited. She said that in that first year, virtually all of her students lost a family member, but she persisted. And the exciting thing is that now she has 31 students. All of these women are residents of the IDP camp, the internally displaced persons camp that is near here. And what's exciting about that is that they are learning a portable skill. Women anticipate that they will be in the camps for years. They're absolutely correct. At this point, we can, if we stop the war tomorrow, it would probably be at least 5 years that they would be in the camp. One of the women said that she anticipated being in the camps for 10 years. I hope not, but she's probably right. And but whenever they leave, they will be able to take this skill with them. This is a picture of a woman who's showing me how to deliver a baby. You can see that it's a fuzzy picture because she's moving very quickly, but you can also see the quality of the equipment that they use. Certainly in America, our residents, even when they start out, will learn on mannequins that are much more lifelike, and then eventually, of course, will deliver real babies for more women. I'm on the board of Brigham and Women's Hospital and have identified a woman, Nawal Noor, who is actually from North Sudan. He's a gynecologist, OB-gynecologist, who's done wonderful work, internationally recognized work around female circumcision. And she has agreed to, when things are stable, to supply them with more modern equipment. So we're looking forward to that project as well, another My Sister's Keeper project in Darfur. Again, you've heard the extent to which rape is such a prevalent entity in this war. I have considered it a strategic weapon of mass psychosocial spiritual destruction. To take out a woman is not only to eliminate her, but her children and her children's children. It's designed to undermine the well-being of communities for generations yet to come. So when people ask why should I be concerned about Sudan and the raping of women in Sudan, I very much see it as part of a global culture of violence against women that fairly much operates with impunity. And so it's the same force that undergirds domestic violence in America, or bride burnings in India, or abduction and rape of young girls in Chihuahua, Mexico. It is all the same force. And so to speak out against the violation of women in South Sudan and in Darfur is to speak out on behalf of women around the world who have been subjected to this inhumanity. So part of, as an organization, having been and doing and work in Southern Sudan since 2001, and in particular when Gloria and Liz went to Darfur in early 2005, and were witnesses to what was going on with the women in the western part of Sudan, it had to bring to bear on our organization. And part of what we say that we are about also is the advocacy. So it's very much the proactive, constructive building of school, seeing life beyond the war and beyond the crisis, but at the same time the political and education work very much needs to be done. So then we kind of took this up as a group as well in terms of advocacy relative to what was going on in Darfur, concurrent with our continuing development work in the South. And so we kind of jumped more into this whole aspect of bringing attention, advocacy, rallying, advocacy of all sorts relative to the fact that this was a genocide taking place. Yet again, we had the peace agreement signed in 2005, but yet on the West, the same government was perpetrating similar acts that had perfected over 21 years of a civil war in the West. And there was great political controversy about actually calling it a genocide from the position of the UN, but Colin Powell, when he was in office, and subsequently our Congress and our own president has called it a genocide. And of course, part of the difficulty with that from a political standpoint is once that happens, because of this convention, the world community is compelled to have to take steps to prevent it and to stop it. So that was seen as very central to the core of what our work was about, not just to
to do one without the other, but hand in hand to bring change very much for all of Sudan in a way that would be just. So we took this particular scripture from Proverbs very seriously. Rescue the perishing. Don't hesitate to step in and help. If you say, hey, that's none of my business, will that get you off the hook? Someone is watching you closely, you know. Someone not impressed with weak excuses. This is actually a rally about 2 years ago when Kofi Annan was the commencement speaker here. He was speaking and we were rallying in Harvard Square, getting him to bring some leadership, in particular relative to what was clearly, by all accounts, a genocide. So that's part of our advocacy as well. And earlier this year, Gloria took leave from her medical practice. We gave her permission to leave Boston and her pastoral duties at Bethel AME Church, where I'm also a staff minister there. And my sister's keeper, we all agreed to release her because she was asked to be the chairwoman of a national campaign identified for her work locally and over the years in Sudan. She also had co-founded the Massachusetts Coalition to Save Darfur, and then was asked to take a national position to help to organize the grassroots of advocates that were doing work but disparate, not organized. And so she gave leadership to this national campaign called the Million Voices for Darfur campaign.
The goals for the campaign were two. One was to collect 1 million postcards to President Bush calling for a multinational peacekeeping force to actually protect the people of Darfur. And the postcards had this message on them, President Bush, during your first year in the White House, you wrote in the margins of a report on the Rwandan genocide, "Not on my watch." I urge you to live up to those words by using the power of your office to support a stronger multinational force to protect the people of Darfur. We began this campaign in January 12th, which was the anniversary of the signing of the declaration that you just read to define genocide. By February, let me say this, by February of 2006, again, our goal was 1 million. We had collected 10,000 postcards, so we were a very, very long way from our goal. On April 30th, when we had held a rally in D.C. on the National Mall, we actually announced 760,000 postcards. So we, in the course of 2 months, had gone from 10,000 to 760,000. This is a picture of a rally that we had in Boston. Myself and Ken Sweeter, who is the other co-chair for the Massachusetts Coalition to Save Darfur. What can you do? You can self-educate, and these are the particular websites that you can go to. Also invite you to look at www.mskeeper.org, which is will refer you to our website. And a couple of days before the rally on April 30th, I was one of 8 people who actually met with President Bush. He took note of the rally and thought it was a tremendous effort, encouraged people, Americans around the country, to attend this rally as well as any number of other rallies. This, of course, as you recognize, our George. And next to George is Simon Deng, who is from South Sudan. He was enslaved as a young boy, made his way through circuitous means to the United States, now has U.S. citizenship, and speaks out about the plight of people in South Sudan as well as Darfur. Next slide. Then on April 30th, we held this rally. We initially took out a certificate and estimated that we would have 10 to 15,000. We thought if we could get that many people to the National Mall to indicate that we care, that would be very significant. We were pleased that there were somewhere between 60 and 75,000 people who were in attendance. And the big story was not so much the number, but the diversity, the fact that it really was representative of people of different faiths, different races. It was an international crowd. I was most excited about the attendance of people from Sudan. We had an estimated 500 to 700 people from Sudan who are here in the United States. That was under well, it was just a tremendous thing that they have never come together like that. And what you could hear was the recognition that so often the government of Sudan has pitted one group against another. And they pitted the Muslims against the Christians. In Darfur, they pitted African Muslims against Arab Muslims. And what people were saying is that we are not one another's enemy, that our government is in fact the enemy here.
Mm-hmm. And so again, from the vantage point of my sister's keeper, being one of these 6 women who involved in this work for some years in the southern part, and I'm growing in my understanding of the aspect of genocide and what that entails, and the international players of it. It's an understatement to say how remarkable it has been to kind of just be on the periphery of these world events happening, from a rally 2 or 3 years ago in Harvard Square to this rally here, underscores several things. One of which is the ability of one people and lots of one people getting together and working in concert to make a difference. Subsequent to the rally, and it was not only because of the rally, but it certainly helped, there was a peace agreement signed in Western Sudan, and still there is lots more work to be done there, but the international community is coming together to bring UN peacekeepers to help with the African Union effort there. So quite remarkable. So that's one thing that was underscored. And then for us, what else can you do? People of faith need to continue to pray, because these sorts of battles are waged on various levels. And we strongly believe that prayer has had a lot to do with the change that has happened in the country. So we encourage you to do that on behalf of these girls in southern Sudan who are looking to be educated and to better their country so that they can be leaders in their own country.
This is a picture of another young girl in Darfur who I met in the school in Darfur. And so all of these beg that same question: who will be my sister's keeper? And I want to suggest that we take a cue from this woman who said, "I'm leaving this legacy to each and every one of you to bring peace and justice, equality, love, and a fulfillment of what our lives should be. Without vision, the people will perish. And without courage and inspiration, dreams will die, the dream of freedom and the dream of peace." And our hope is that you will join us in declaring that we will be our sister's keeper.
Thank you so much, Gloria and Melinda. I'm going to ask our speakers to sit here, but we want everybody to speak into a microphone because we are taping this, so that folks who couldn't come today can watch it on the web. So when you have a question, someone will bring you a microphone. So please, the floor is open.
Can you just raise your hand if you'd like a mic to ask a question?
You know, living out our Oprah fantasies here, right? With the mic.
First of all, thank you both for a wonderful presentation and your incredible commitment to Darfur and its women. I'm just wondering if you could speak about what you know in terms of what's happening with girls' education and women's education in Darfur as a whole. Who's working on it?
Well, really, the question is what's happening in terms of girls' education in Darfur. At this point, not a whole lot. Again, part of the challenge with all of Sudan is that there are many groups have been marginalized, and that's been the case in Darfur as well. 95% illiteracy. So nobody has really been educated adequately. But there certainly are some women's groups. Before the war, there were women's groups, and there's still some groups on the ground that are trying to educate, but pretty much everything has been disrupted. So people are in schools in the IDP camps, but they don't have adequate supplies. Nobody's getting paid, and they're certainly committed, but for the most part, it's war, and nobody's getting much of anything.
Can I ask just one other question? You've been so conscious and talking about rape. One of the things you did not talk about in Sudan is AIDS and what's happening to women there, given that all the vulnerability factors are certainly in place.
Right. Nobody knows for sure what the prevalence of HIV/AIDS in Sudan. The estimates are somewhere around 2.5% to 3%. And every now and then, if you read the literature, you'll see something like a piece that somebody's written talking about the crisis of AIDS. But again, we really don't know. What we do know is that it's certainly not as prevalent as it is in other countries, where if you travel in Uganda or in Kenya, even in Ethiopia, AIDS seems so palpable. So we don't see the same kind of death and dying in Sudan as we do elsewhere. Now, that being said, with the peace agreement in the South, one of the major concerns is that with refugees who have been in Uganda and in those camps in Kenya where HIV is present, the concern is that they will then return home and they will bring their AIDS with them. So one of our earliest projects 4 years ago was to actually bring a physician from South Sudan to Boston. He served as a visiting scholar at the BI Deaconess Hospital for 2.5 months and got all the latest information about HIV/AIDS. We developed a very rudimentary strategy for identifying AIDS and then sent him back again where he runs an incredible clinic, one of the only physicians that serves about 1 million people. And now that the government has established a commission for HIV/AIDS, he's been tapped as one of the primary leaders for that. So we're hoping that we can put some things in place so that when it does show, it won't be the kind of devastation that we've seen. That obviously would deep six any of our work in terms of girls' education.
I saw a hand here.
Thank you again for this very inspiring talk for all of us. And I think it's so wonderful that you start by listening to the people there, to work with them on things that they identify. I was wondering how supportive your own churches are of this process and what your sources of funding are.
Well, certainly our home church and has been very, very supportive. We are an arm of Bethel AME Church. They serve as our kind of organizational covering for what we do. And the pastor of that church is the Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond, husband of Gloria Hammond, and also has been to Sudan several times himself. So part of what Pastor Gloria has been saying and observing is that we as a church body, we have grown in our own understanding. This has become our project. And as she was the national chair of the Million Voices for Darfur campaign, we have been the national church headquarters for that as well. Certainly locally, the Black Ministerial Alliance has been committed, and the first trip that Gloria and Liz and Pastor Ray took was with other ministers from the Black Ministerial Alliance and have rallied with us and supported the work over the years. And then, of course, nationally, many from the evangelical community have been in the forefront of much of the advocacy that has happened in southern Sudan, and that has continued to be even relative to the work in western Sudan as well. So the church community generally has been pretty activated on this issue. Of course, there's work to do in terms of the Christian community, and the Jewish community in particular has been front and center to this over the years, and that's an understatement. They really have taken it up as well. And so much of her work was to bring together all of the different faiths, certainly brothers and sisters who practice Islam as well, to coalesce over this clearly key humanitarian crisis.
And our funding comes from a variety of sources, pretty much all private, though. And we think that's one of the real strengths of this model, the My Sister's Keeper. We're not looking to grow big and be, the next big, fat humanitarian agency. We want to stay small. We say our first level of keeping is to one another. But we've been able to pool our collective networks and resources and contacts and we've raised enough money to build a school and then some, and to hire a director. So it's,
yeah,
but it's all
need more, though. We need
that's
more.
Right. Yes, that's right. That the record reflected. Yes. We did ask for more, right? But our funding pretty much is just from individuals that we know. So we haven't needed to write grants. People hear about it and they come alongside and partner with us.
Suzanne.
I have no idea if this is even on, but I'm Susanna, and I'm wondering whether or how you're working with young people in your church to show them what's happening with young people in Sudan and what kind of things they can do to help.
For me, it's one of the most exciting initiatives has been engaging young people in the cause of social justice in general. And we, not so much in Sudan, but we've got there's now part of a culture for our young people to do something overseas. And that's very unusual for an African American congregation, to be quite honest. But our young people have traveled to Kenya this summer. They're going to Fiji Islands. I'm not so sure what kind of, I don't know, it seems a little suspect to me. But they've also worked in Mexico. We'll have one group that will go to serve in the Gulf area. They've been to Texas. So there is part now of their consciousness is to serve in areas where people can't wear $75 sneakers, right? But we have not, I've not engaged, I haven't brought anybody to Sudan yet, and part of it is it is a war zone. And while many of them would like to come, we're not going to do that quite yet. But they're certainly aware of Sudan, have conducted part of the Million Voices campaign, have conducted it in their schools and been very engaged in the work of missions in general, which is hugely exciting.
Connie.
How do people communicate on the ground? I mean, how do your message go from location to location? It seems that if 90% and more are illiterate, there must be other ways of communication. Quick.
Well, that makes me respond in two ways. One relative to logistically communicating, since we're here and they're 9,000 miles there. And that's been, part of the difficulty. Sudan is not a developed country at all. There's no running water, there's no electricity, hardly any roads. So a lot of the things that we take for granted don't exist there. And that's part of the difficulty of our work in terms of staying attuned to what's going on, being able to communicate when you're trying to build something and still stay in relationship. One of the things that we raised funds for and was able to purchase 2 years ago was a satellite phone for Achol to use to be able to communicate. And we, set up regular monthly kind of check-in dates where her time she would call or we would call and that kind of thing. Several of the humanitarian groups that are there have internet, so every time we go, we're always reinforcing and making relationships with those people there to be able to get messages through to the people in the village. And then right now, one of the things that's forefront on our agenda is to hire a field director, someone who will be there and live there and do a lot of the work of organizing and getting the information, who lives in Akan, in the village of Akan, and with whom we can communicate more regularly. Over the times we've been there, how we got into this was Gloria's quest for a translator. And again, those folks have been educated before the war. So very, I hope we also are clear to say that these are brilliant people and very enterprising, and we learn so much from them, but also educated. Some of them have been educated, and usually the older ones still are able to know English as well. And so we always have an army of translators, young people who literally translate between Dinka and English, and Arabic is a middle language as well.
So they are able to get the word out. It's, long before people were educated, they figured it out. So people will run and walk. They'd use drumming. I continue to be amazed at how the word can circulate. So people know when we're showing up, and they just.
How much are cell phones churches?
People don't have cell phones so much now. Satellite phones is what people have, and they are very expensive, but people do have them. I suspect that when there's more of an infrastructure, more people will have cell phones. Certainly in northern Sudan, in Khartoum, for example, cell phones, not everybody, but lots of people have cell phones, so that will eventually come in South Sudan as well.
Connie Parvey, I saw your hand.
I keep running into these young men from the Sudan who are here, many of them late teens and early 20s, the Lost Boys and others. I wondered what the Sudanese community here, and especially these younger people, are they responding? Are they engaged in this? Is this an avenue for them to keep in touch with their home country while they're working here at Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or something like that?
Yes, just so you'll know, the story with the Lost Boys is as we described at the onset of the war, because boys and men were targeted. Families just said leave, and they said go that way, and they started walking, didn't even know where they were going, but over a period of time, thousands and thousands sort of made this path. So they ended up initially in Ethiopia, and then where they were in camps there. Then when Ethiopia and Eritrea started fighting again, they got the right foot of fellowship, came back through Sudan during rainy season, and then went into Kenya. Many of these young boys were actually lost during their cross over the river, the Nile River, eaten by crocodiles. Just horrible, horrible stories that what they endured. And they left when they were like 7, 8, and 9. So it's a real challenging situation because they have essentially grown up without grown-ups. They then ended up many of them in a refugee camp in northern Kenya, and then when they got refugee status to come to America, they came in by the thousands. It's a challenge because in many ways it would be very difficult for them to go home, because it's such a different culture. They were so young when they left. And it's been a challenge here in America as well. Nevertheless, they're wonderful, industrious young men. There are some young girls as well who are included as Lost Girls. They've certainly embraced this effort in support of the whole country of Sudan. So my mantra is to stop the genocide in Darfur, to bring peace and justice to all Sudan. And so with that as a mantra, the support of not only the Lost Boys, but many of the refugees in America has been tremendous. There's something like 250,000 Sudanese who are in America as part of the diaspora.
I'm so sorry to cut us off because I know many more of you have questions, and I hope you'll be able to speak with Gloria and Melinda maybe over a cup of coffee. We want to give you a few minutes to get a snack, replenish your coffee cup, and we'll be back here at 10:25 for the next part of our program. Thank you so much for your kind attention.